startup grind. Very excited to be here with you today. So as mentioned, I'm Christina Cacioppo, CEO and co-founder of Vanta. Vanta helps other companies, quickly growing ones, get secure initially, and then prove that security through compliance certifications like SOC 2, ISO 27001, GDPR, whole host of others. And the idea for Vanta originally came, like so many do, out of needing the product myself. So flashback to 2016, and I was a product manager at Dropbox, trying to take a brand new product at the time to market, Dropbox Paper. And we had been advised to act like a startup. So we were trying to move fast and break things, and we're kind of staying up all the time because we thought Paper was going to be bigger than the rest of Dropbox. And so that's what we were doing. But first step in that was to actually, release the product to market and get more than 2 users who didn't know someone on the team. And we were about to do that when we realized that we couldn't. That the Dropbox legal team came and said, hey, you all haven't been built and haven't been building to meet any of our security commitments or our compliance commitments. And so you can't be, we can't, release you under the Dropbox name. You're not Dropbox in this case. And so we're like, okay, well, what does that mean? And we were trying to move fast. And we realized, well, one part of it, amongst many, was we had to stop and get a SOC 2. At the time, didn't know what that meant at all. Went in and figured out what it meant, and it basically meant that we would have to take the whole product and engineering team and for about 1.5 years not work on this product, that we didn't even know if it had product market fit or not, but instead spend it getting secure and compliant. And so this was taking place in kind of 2 things. One, 2016 Dropbox, this was the height of Dropbox's powers and prowess in Silicon Valley. And there was this moment of even this company that basically has everything, the best of the best, we're stalled out for 1.5 years. The second bit was, again, time machine to 2016. There was this slew of high-profile data breaches. Equifax, Uber, 2016 election, right? And it was becoming clear that securing internet products was going to be table stakes moving forward. Wasn't something that we could ignore or put off until later. And so in 2017, I co-founded Vanta with the idea that if you give small and growing companies the tools to both get secure and then prove that security through compliance certifications, you'll level the field for them. These startups and growing companies will see unlocked deals. They'll be able to grow faster. And in the process, and almost most importantly, we'd be making the internet more secure. So that was 2017. And then by the end of 2020, we surpassed $10 million in ARR and helped almost 1,000 customers improve their security. And we'd raised a seed round and gone through Y Combinator, but at this point, we hadn't raised a Series A. It was just the seed money and revenue from our customers. But we're kind of looking at the whooshy chart, right? And we felt kind of the pull of the market and the feedback from customers and saw all of these ways we wanted to invest and improve the product and build out more. And it was kind of hard to do that because you're looking at the cash balance literally every week, right? And some of these bigger investments, both a bunch of certainty in them, but the cash just felt tough. And so in May of 2021, we ended up raising our first round of institutional venture. It was this $50 million Series A round from Sequoia. And so this decision to wait until we passed $10 million in ARR for our first funding round wasn't one that was made lightly. Honestly, also, it wasn't the original plan. The original plan was, we went through Y Combinator in early 2018, so in March, we raised that seed round, and it was great, let's go do the thing all the other YC SaaS companies do, and get to $1 million in revenue and raise a Series A. And then, when we get to 10 million, we'll raise a Series B, and so on. No use innovating on this playbook. This is kind of the standard Silicon Valley startup playbook. Let's just do that. And so that was the original plan. And also, when we were leaving YC, we felt great. It was we'd hit our revenue goal, raise this seed round, people seem to want the product, so let's stop selling it. This is a brilliant idea at the time. But let's go recruit a bunch of engineers and recruit everyone else. And so that's kind of what we did. And then by the end of 2018, again, still feeling good, had the seed round, had some engineers, no more customers than we had before. And I went over to YC, and a partner kind of pulled me into a room and was like, Christina, you guys are really off track. And I was like, what do you mean? We're awesome. And he's like, nope. Like, VCs want like continuous revenue growth, and you are flat. And you can tell them it's because you're not selling, but like, that's not a very compelling story, right? And there's a little bit of a clock here, right? Like, people think about how long has it been since YC? Like, how long did it take them to get to X million in revenue? So anyway, so I freaked out, basically. Tried to calm down, but was kind of freaked out. But also kind of, as I calmed down, realized like, okay, well, definitely don't want to go raise money now. And mostly like, I don't want to go raise money on somebody else's timeline. That's not the right thing for the business. And also if like, I'm not going to go pitch Vanta with the confidence that it deserves. Like, I'm freaked out, everyone's going to be able to tell. So didn't go try to finance, didn't try to build slides. Instead, did a few other things. One, devoted more time to just talking to customers, seeing what they liked about the product, seeing what they didn't, filtering that into product improvements. As part of that talking to customers, also was just selling Vanta, and that was like a really effective way to also do product development. See my like PM background coming through. And then all of these things together helped me like grow my conviction that we were solving a real problem for real people and it mattered. And so, you know, kind of doubled down on doing these things, and 6 months later, we actually were at that $1 million in ARR. And I did, in fact, send a celebratory email to like said YC partner who's very supportive, but also kind of was like, well, why stop here, right? Like, we don't necessarily need to raise the money. This thing is working. And hey, if I follow that logic, like, wouldn't it be more compelling if I showed up with $2 million in revenue to the VC pitch meeting and not the 1 million? And so it kind of seemed like something had like shifted, and I was like more clear-eyed about what the company should do and what I could do to help that. And like financing kind of seemed like a distraction. So I'll keep going, but before I do, I want to stop here and say this is not a talk about how you should not raise money or like a talk about how all VCs are bad. I actually started my career at an early stage venture firm, Union Square Ventures in New York. They're wonderful. So it's not that I'm like very happy with Sequoia as partners. It's not that, but it is more a talk about figuring out the right time to bring partners like that into your business, which again, may be on the Silicon Valley like standard timeline and might not. So one thing we found, and again, especially in retrospect, when I look back on that period, growing so long without venture funding did a lot of really good things for the company. We had to rely on organic word of mouth because we just didn't have marketing budgets, and more so, we didn't even have a marketing team, which is something that I just mostly just look back on in shame. But truly, we just like weren't actually doing all that much marketing, and so most everything came from word of mouth, and that was this tremendous barometer of product market fit. We also just had to be disciplined about spending. And we'd send the bank, like every Monday, we'd send the bank balance out to everyone. There weren't that many of us, but it just instilled this discipline and of like, no, actually, like spend the money, the company's money like your own, and like here's how much it is, and like, yes, it's a lot if we had a personal bank account, but like fundamentally it's not. And then most importantly, we had to rely on our own internal calibration of whether we were doing a good job. So it wasn't like, oh, we're doing a good job because Sequoia likes us. We're doing a good job because all the VCs like us, because the Sequoia partner, Andrew Reed, who is wonderful, likes us, right? It's just like, do we think we are doing a good job? And building that internally in that sense. And so I think maybe able to tell, huge believer in this approach. And so today I wanted to share with you 4 lessons from scaling Vanta to $10 million in ARR without a Series A round of funding. So first up, lesson number 1, the market always wins, aka build something people want. So if you're starting a company in general, you probably have a pretty good sense that you have an idea about something people want, and you might even have a product. But validating that idea before you spend a bunch of time on it or spend a bunch of time building it, I think is very much the way to go. I say this because prior to Vanta, I built a lot of things and wrote a lot of code for things no one wanted. And it wasn't kind of fun to code at the time, and then afterward it was all kind of terrible. And so for Vanta, I was like pretty convinced that you're like, okay, even though we can go write a bunch of code, we don't quite know what code to write. We don't quite know what product to build. So let's go spend a bunch of time talking to founders and engineers about security and compliance broadly, like seeing what sorts of problems or issues they have. And so we did this and found there were kind of two key purchase triggers for security, right? We found like everyone kind of wants to be more secure, but it's hard to prioritize, and those two things sort of helped rise to the top. The first thing was closing deals. So especially for B2B SaaS, which a lot of y'all are probably in, you'd find that you'd, like find someone to sell to and have a champion and go through this whole sales process, and then kind of when it felt like you were about to get a signature, you instead got a long security questionnaire, right? Or you got a long security review, or you got like, hey, like we did at Dropbox Paper, come back when you're SOC 2 compliant, right? And this was happening more and more, and these like security reviews and certifications and questionnaires and that whole alphabet soup were basically becoming table stakes for getting things done. And so I talked to these CEOs and CTOs who spent all this time, filling out questionnaires and going through the hoops and getting on the phone and being like, I went to a shiny school, you should trust me, like all sorts of stuff, right? But like fundamentally what we realized was that if you're like trying to sell to Google or you're trying to sell to Figma and they tell you to jump 12 feet in the air, most startup founders will jump 13 feet in the air. Like it is just like it is worth getting that logo and doing this. The second reason, different, but was security kind of falls in this like high anxiety, low knowledge gap where people like want to do the right thing. They know there's real ramifications to messing it up, but it's not always clear what that right thing is, or it's actually often unclear. And so we'd find a lot of CTOs and startups that would spend a bunch of money on expensive consultants who would sometimes help and sometimes just like leave them with sheets of Word documents that were sort of incomprehensible and everything in between. But there was, again, a lot of effort going in here, but in a way that kind of felt really unsatisfying to everyone. And there's kind of a lot of, CTOs losing sleep, literally, at the end of the day here. And so at this point, had these conversations and sort of validated this idea of like there's a lot of motivation for people to buy a product that made getting secure and compliant faster and easier and more comprehensible. And that was good, but then you're like, well, what the heck do you build with that, right? Like what product is that? And so kind of through this, and through the Dropbox experience, knew that SOC 2s were sort of the common application for security, if you remember these from like college, right? It's like you go through one of these once and you can kind of send them to lots of people and they roughly know what's going on and will accept it. And so that appealed, I think, kind of the engineers in us, and we're like, yeah, do something once and like copy paste over time, right? Like systematize as much as you can. So how do you make SOC, what is SOC 2 compliance? How do you make it more accessible? How would you automate it? Kind of figured like, okay, if we could figure out that stuff, probably a bunch of people who are really interested. But again, what is SOC 2? Do we understand it? How do you automate it? Like what's going on there? So here we kind of got lucky and had some friends at Segment who were about to start thinking about the first compliance certification. And they kind of didn't know what was going on. They just, again, deals kept getting blocked. They kept getting those requests. And they knew we didn't really know a ton about this, but they knew we worked hard. And they also had a large, brand new office. And so invited us in for a few weeks, and we got to, sit and basically try to figure this out for them. And so literally for a few weeks, it started with just reading dozens of SOC 2 reports, which is, some people's brand of fun, but just truly reading them and trying to be how are these different? What's in them? Can you break these apart? Everyone says they're all different, but how different are they? And then also going and talking to the Segment team and being like, hey, do you do this? Do you do this? How do you think about, access management? If I asked you to tell me if all your databases are encrypted, what would you do, right? Just a lot of these questions. And this is what came out of it. Literally, Vanta's V0 is this color-coded, conditional formatted spreadsheet that was what are the SOC 2 controls in compliance speak? Are they being done right now? How close to done are they? And what do you have to do to fix it? And so, at the end of the few weeks, kind of in response to taking their time and eating all their chocolate-covered pretzels, we gave them the spreadsheet, and then asked them these 3 questions that I encourage y'all to use here, kind of making a new thing. First question, what did I give you? Like, this thing, like, how, play it back to me. Like, what is this thing? Would you use it? Is this thing useful? How much would you pay for it? So what did I give you? Would you use it? How much would you pay for it? That was it. And I would say, if they can't answer these 3 questions in a way that you would like them to, go back and try again. Because they're both very simple, but also really hard. Again, built a lot of things prior to Vanta no one wanted. For the most part, I couldn't get past question 1. But like with this spreadsheet, like it worked. And so at this point, again, our product was this color-coded spreadsheet, right? We sort of knew we were on the right track. In addition to like segment understanding it, we were like, ooh, we actually kind of like made a bunch of simplifying assumptions here, and we think we could actually like engineerify what this thing is. We broke down what a SOC 2 is into these different component pieces. This makes sense. We're starting to think about how you could like write code against them or test them, which became a like big Vanta word, but testing things. Again, segment understood it, and they were like, you gave me a spreadsheet that tells me how to get a SOC 2, and yes, it is useful, and I would have paid you X. Cool. And then third, again, they actually said they would pay for it. They gave a dollar number that was like hilarious. I mean, it's probably cheap to like any real consultant, but at the time you're just like, you would pay me more than chocolate-covered pretzels for this thing? Like, whoa, feels great. So that's how we, again, did very early product development and figured out how to build something that people wanted. Also say, a little bit of a hobby horse of mine, like no matter how much you raise or buzz you generate, you can't raise your way into the right product. And so if you're trying to build without taking on funding, super important to do this early and build the right thing or as close to the right thing as you can. I'll also say, if you're building with a lot of money, in a lot of ways the stakes are higher and the pivots seem harder. So it is also very important to try to validate people actually want your thing before you pour a bunch of engineering time in. That's hard to change. So that's lesson number 1. Lesson number 2. Charging annually makes everything better. Truly. So if you're building something that people want, the next piece that you've got to figure out is how to sell and charge for your product. And one thing I've learned from Vanta that is if you can, charging annually makes everything better. So when I first started selling Vanta, I was selling both annual and month-to-month contracts because I wanted to make it easy for people to buy the way they wanted to buy, didn't really want to know. And also this seemed what SaaS companies do, and I didn't really know what I was doing. So you're like, every other company does this, I should probably do it too. So we had this annual pricing option, this monthly pricing option, whatever. Then brought in a salesperson who actually knew what he was doing, and he immediately stopped charging monthly. You could only buy Vanta annually. And I was a little like, what are you doing? You do know more than I do, but this is very scary. And he was like, no, I got you. And he did. He was like, look, you guys are creating this security automation category. You've got to explain what this product is. And at the time, we were just selling straight against the consultants. And it was like, would you like a consultant or would you like a robot to do this for you? Right? And so we're already explaining that. And then we're complicating it even more by adding all of these other buying and purchase options and contract options. Good intentions, trying to let people the way they wanted to buy, but just confusing the whole matter. And kind of more broadly, we had built this product to relieve anxiety, but in the process, we're just introducing a lot more anxiety throughout it, making it more complicated to buy. And so our first rep started quoting, or just kept quoting annual pricing only, and it worked really well. People just didn't even mind. They didn't really even ask. They were just like, oh, this is how you charge, and so I shall move forward. And you're like, wow, manifesting the reality, this is what they talk about. But it also kind of made sense in retrospect, right? I'm being a little fast and loose, but security isn't something that you want to think about on a month-to-month basis, right? It is much more foundational in something you are doing or you are not doing. You're not turning it on and off, again, month after month. We also found that mindset from kind of the sales process carried into the customer side, right? Like folks were using Vanta a little bit differently. It was like, this is a thing I'm using. I'm trying to bake it into my processes. Do you guys have any advice on doing that, right? And being something that's much more foundational than, again, this sort of like month-to-month contract. So I'd also say, so the annual pricing was nice for kind of some of these reasons. There were a few just other pieces. Actually really, it made it easier to keep track of customers, because you like knew what they were doing, you knew there was a goal within a time period, and that just helped us better support them through all of this and through our own growth. And like the RevOps or go-to-market systems side, just easier because it was basically just one thing we sold, which at the time was an annual subscription to Vanta for SOC 2. Now it's more complicated, but at the time, that was it. Which was great when you don't really have RevOps and might not even know what it really is. And then revenue itself just became more predictable, making it less likely we'd have to go raise money to avoid some cash crunch. And so also, I think annual billing can be a good barometer of lesson number 1, which is that, like, did you build something that people really want? It takes a lot of confidence in your product, I think, especially as someone who builds products and knows how poor they are in lots of ways, to like ask for an annual payment upfront, sight unseen. But if you get yourself to do it and you get a yes, you've got, I think, a very good signal on this question. So that is lesson number 2. Lesson 3, hire more workhorses, spend less time searching for unicorns. So, okay, first you build something people want. Second, you sell it to them in a way that makes sense to them and they want to buy. The next big challenge for any scaling startup is hiring. The most valuable advice I have on this topic is, sort of that there is in fact no silver bullet, as the slide says. You just have to spend a tremendous amount of time here, like a painful amount of time. When I was in YC, they told us we should all be spending, post-YC, 50% of our time on hiring, which feels crazy when you're like, 2 of us are the company, and if we are doing that, like literally nothing else happens, right? Like literally nothing else. And I thought it was totally unreasonable. Maybe yes, maybe no. I actually think it is actually pretty reasonable. It's like one of those like eat your broccoli sort of truisms from startups that are a little counterintuitive but correct. There's like no magic bullets here. You just have to like put in all of this time. And if you are spending all this time hiring, like 50+% of your time, you're probably talking to a lot of people, including for roles that maybe you don't have yet, or you're like, people keep saying RevOps, what the heck is that, right? I don't need it now, but maybe I'll try to go figure it out so I can figure out when I need it. And so part of that is you're building pipelines for different candidates and different roles. That again, might be short term, might be medium term, might be years out. But it's funny, now Vanta's been around for about 4 years, and we probably have on the order of a dozen employees who have like multi-year recruiting processes. Some which they know they were in, some which they definitely did not know they were being recruited for years, right? But it's funny, and it like continues to pay dividends to this day. We had an executive start last week, and arguably her recruiting process began 2 years ago. But again, I don't think she realized it at the time either. But it is just, this is a constant thing, and these pipelines, like this is not just a see today thing, it is just for everything. And yeah, I mean, I guess if I had one silver bullet piece of hiring advice, it's like invent a time machine and like go back 2 years ago to start, because like there is just nothing else there. And so once you're spending like all of this time hiring, my next piece of advice might be painful to you. It's very painful to me in retrospect, but it's like you're probably over-engineering what you're looking for, especially in the early days. And I know this because we definitely did it. We were like trying to grow our team of like smart, motivated people who wanted to have a big impact on the world. And we were like, our company is really unique and special, which it is, but also it wasn't, so unique and special that it like didn't have CSMs or didn't have operations people or didn't have all of these standard roles that SaaS companies have. And so what we were doing was we were sort of meeting people who like really wanted to work at a startup and they were super talented, but they didn't want one of the standard roles. And we were like, totally, you are super talented. We'll make this like bespoke job for you. which we did. And then reality hit, and you're like, and somebody needs to be a customer success manager, right? And it's both, but this is like very much on us. And I think there was this like expectation mismatch that like is painful. And, I mean, kind of funny when you have slides like this, but like actually still kind of deeply painful because I think we just mess this up. And this idea of Ted Lasso, where you take this like highly specialized person in one area and like plop them down somewhere else, and like magic happens, is incredible TV, but I don't think it really happens in real life. And I think in the context of a small SaaS company in particular, you want folks who are like great and excited about what the actual job is that you have. And to that point, like, it's important to pitch people on how special your startup is. And it's also important to be very real with them about what the job is, right? And so these standard SaaS titles, which like we had at the time, and we all have on Vanta.com/jobs if anyone is interested today, but like, it's like very real, and like these don't look all that exciting, but they're in fact, like, they're exciting roles and an exciting company, there's a lot of stuff, but like those are the places to build excitement. Not this is, some totally bespoke, crazy job description that doesn't exist in real life. So that's lesson number 3. Lesson 4. Know which problems can be solved with money and which can't. So if you master the first 3 lessons, meaning you've got something with product market fit, go to market, making sense and clicking, and you've got a strong team, you probably have no lack of financing options and VCs who would love to give you money. And that is wonderful and tremendous and very fun. But my final kind of advice before signing on any dotted line or like breaking out all the champagne is that kind of be clear with yourself about which problems the money can help you solve and which will be waiting for you after the champagne hangover. And so there's a lot of good reasons to raise before $10 million in ARR, or like kind of when you think you're ready, right? Like much before when Vanta did. And this isn't a speech about not raising money. I think when I like reflect back on the Vanta story, like good reasons to raise are markets changing, competitor dynamics are changing, you think something here is about to change. You're hiring people really fast. Like this was one of our sort of internal goals for ourselves early on, was like, well, let's try to hire so quickly we run out of money, like start depleting the bank account, right? And if you can do that, amazing, great, right? Like then the cash is no longer the constraint, right? Or if your marketing machine is sort of printing money, right? You put in $1 in whatever channel and you're getting like $5 customer dollars back, right? Like yes, then just put money in channel until you can't. Sure. But fundraising is at its shortest, probably a 1 to 2 month process. I think even now in the Zoom era, you're still basically looking at a month with all the prep to do and then the follow-up. And what I found is you'll have to take a step back from your day-to-day responsibilities in order to do that. I think there's 2 reasons for that. One is there's just a lot of data to gather, like a deck to put together, a story, right, a lot. And if you're a earlier stage team, you probably don't have a bunch of experienced finance folks to help you do that, which is fine, but it means a lot of it's on you. I also think you kind of want to get in the headspace of being like, my company is perfect and there's nothing wrong with it, which is very hard to do when you're balancing the investor meetings with like whatever's on fire that afternoon. And so it's easier to just be like, hey team, like I'm going to disappear for a few weeks. You do you, I'll be back. And then like try to, again, convince yourself everything is perfect. And so that's what I did for this. I like canceled everything for a few weeks. And again, some of the time was like deck building and working and talking to VCs, but some time was just like not reading about the latest, exciting but fire of the moment. And so there's this like very real time commitment that I think is true, again, even in the Zoom financing, like checks slung over like iMessage era that kind of like last year was. And then beside that time commitment, again, there's just a bunch of business problems, like validating the idea or figuring out your customer pitch and packaging that money doesn't solve. I think money actually exacerbates because then you have to kind of pretend to have these things before you actually do. And as you've seen from our story, there's good reasons to wait. Going further without raising gives you more time to focus on customers and sales, sort of insulates you from the outside world and forces you and your team to think through, again, are we doing a good job? Because we think we're doing a good job, not because so-and-so at Sequoia thinks we're doing a good job. And I think as an industry, we often celebrate these big PR moments. And like, it's really fun to get your team's photo in Forbes and have this like record sales week because there's so much press around your financing, and that stuff is awesome. But ultimately, it is just 1 week in the like course of a much longer lifespan of the business. And it's really up to you and your team to kind of build the company and the culture that you want. And that is probably not around financing one way or the other. And then when you do take on these external partners, right, like VCs are harder to fire than, like basically impossible to fire, right? Harder than any executive or in some ways even co-founders. You want to like do that knowing them and feeling like true conviction in the product you've built and the team you have. And you found, VCs who feel the same and are also excited about where you are and what opportunity you're chasing going forward. So to that point, every startup is different, and they're all hard, whether they're working or not, and whether they're like proper cash flow positive businesses or like trying to, IPO rocket ship. And I hope that some of the advice in this talk is helpful for you all as you go and build your startups and have fewer of the scars that we have. And so to that, wrap in with 4 lessons for building to $10 million in ARR without a Series A. The first one, build something people want. Second, charge annually up front if you can. Third, spend lots of time hiring, but don't over-engineer your org chart. Again, unicorn, horse with cone. 4, be realistic about what fundraising can and can't solve. So that's Vanta's story. Thank you so much. And would love to continue the conversation. I think live questions, and if we run out.
Yes, we have just a few sneaky moments for the most charming questions for Christina. So whoever wants to make eye contact with me in a sultry way right now and raise your hand, I will call. You are our winner up front here. Yes, let's go ahead. Question is, sorry, just for the sake of the upper deck, when you had a sales team in place, did you also have a marketing team in place?
Yeah,
yeah. When you didn't have a marketing team?
No.
Did you have a sales team?
We hired the first salesperson about 5 quarters before the first marketing person. So I think the sales team was like maybe 3 or 4 people when the first marketing person came in. It worked for us. I think it worked. We succeeded in spite of ourselves there. I would hire marketing much earlier in retrospect.
As a marketer standing on stage with you, I would say you can build whatever you want, but if you don't market it, they won't come. So, just a friendly reminder. Yes.
What comes next for Vanta?
Oh, love it.
What comes next for Vanta, for those listening?
Yeah. So, look, we've always tried to stay very true to the mission, to secure the internet and protect consumer data. I think these compliance certifications are tremendous footholds in, because they're things these fast-growing companies want and need. I think there's also a lot of opportunity to think beyond them, or with and beyond them, as we think about ways that these kind of growing companies can both secure themselves and then prove that externally.
Love that. Yes, saw the hands back here. Go for it, young man.
So for several months, you had a flat-ish revenue, then you saw the growth graph, right? It went up and to the right. How did you scale up as a founder and CEO and kind of keep up with the company's growth as an individual?
Yep.
Question is, how do you keep up with your hockey stick as a founder? Great question.
So okay, a few things I think are helpful. I mean, there's the ways that you keep yourself sane. So for me, actually, just running. So I just there was a period where I would just run in Golden Gate Park every single day, because otherwise I would become an unhappy person. There's very true.
Love the transparency.
There's things around. So I think there's some unlock for me in being I'm just gonna feel bad at everything for the next couple of years. And I'm bad at sales because the last thing I sold was Girl Scout cookies, right? And then when I start to feel better at sales, that is actually a sign that it is fleshed out enough that I should get someone who's actually good to do it. And then I will go back to something that I've never done and will be terrible at. But just like kind of normalizing, like always feeling bad at things was actually very helpful. It was like, oh, cool, I feel bad at it. That's fine. I just have to learn. I think psychologically it was helpful. I think the final thing was having somebody, for me it was an experienced operator, like a few clicks ahead of Vanta, that I could go to and be like, RevOps, like what the hell's going on over there? And like would walk me through and explain it, and I did that like basically every week for a few years.
All right, I just want to make sure I'm like acknowledging the full room here because I'm getting a little biased. I'm coming back to you, don't worry, but I'm going to take you upstairs just because I saw you.
One of the things that investors will kind of talk about is the value add of bringing in addition to the money, and how did you kind of replace that with not raising? You may have just answered that with talking to people that are ahead of you. Was it like a bunch of advisors? Can you talk more about that?
Question is, how did you replace the early stage value add that investors sell you on when they give you venture capital?
I actually like the addition. So I think having worked at an early stage venture firm, that was wonderful with wonderful partners. You see that like these folks are primarily investors, right? And they are great, often hopefully great investors, great at thinking about markets, great at thinking about what talent, like recruiting looks like and making bets there. But they're not operators for the most part. And so I think I was just like mindset-wise a little fortunate because I was like, oh, I don't expect that from my VCs. So I'm going to go find it in other places, to your point, like advisors, like angel investors, other founders, whatever. And so I think just early on sought that out from other places and then kind of didn't think it was something an investor would provide me. They would provide other valuable things, to be clear, but not that guidance.
I love that. Certain VCs are just a slightly more glamorous bank. That's basically what she's saying. Okay, we have time for one or two more questions as long as they are like 10 seconds. I feel like I've made dirty eye contact with you already. Orange shirt, it's you.
I worked at a Bootstrap company before. You kind of were showing like a hybrid model where it's not really a zero-sum game. My question for you is, why did you decide to raise at the 10 million ARR, and what would your company look like if you just...
Well, that's good. Yeah, so I think those, oh, sorry, I'm going fast.
I was just validating his question. I'm just here as an audience member. I was like, oh, that's a wonderful question. Thank you, Orange shirt.
Like why'd we even raise ever? So I think the like reasons to raise felt like it was true for us. We were starting to have knockoffs for the first time, these ankle biters, and people were like, oh, well, Vanta hasn't raised, so like we don't quite know how big they are. And I was like, what's going on? 1,000 customers, like, come on, these things are not equal. But like people didn't know because we didn't talk about how big we were. So there was just a little bit of that, and I didn't, totally underinvested in marketing, so No, debt good. There.
That's good.
I think there was also a bit of like especially at the time, like the CAC LTV math on like, oh, should we be spending more? Like, yes, we should be spending more. Like every metric, even though they're all imprecise, suggests you should go. And like that won't be true forever. And so it did kind of feel like a bit of a window. I think the third thing was around recruiting. We still couldn't recruit fast enough, like to like make the bank balance go down really low, but sort of got the like, well, I think it's very silly if a candidate wants to join because of some investor, because we're the same company we were without them, but like if that's going to help with the candidates, that would be helpful at this stage.
All right, I love that. If you have really brilliant questions, unfortunately you're going to have to ask Christina after this turning moment. Everyone, huge round of applause for an absolutely fantastic presentation. I expect all of you to get to 10 mil in ARR before you accept your A rounds from now on. That was absolutely fabulous. Thank you so much.